Thanks very much. So we've got a running bet over here that I can't do 60 slides in 20 minutes. Let's go. So Territory, the company that I founded 8 years ago, we're all about story meets design meets technology. We call those STDs. And the area in which we specialize in is this fictional user interface space. So imagining what computer screens, what holograms might look like in the future. My mum thinks that I'm IT support for Tom Cruise. That's really not the case. We're actually all about world building. Not world building like this, but more world building like this. So that was 3 minutes gone. So it's all about starting from scratch. We only have a script. You know, it's almost a blank sheet of paper. And while we're going through that script, and we're going through the script with the director, we're teasing out all these moments that technology can be used in the story to say something about that world, about those personalities, really. Script? There it is. I'm not keeping up with myself. So one of the important things that we've discovered in working in films and the craft that goes into it is that so much of what people are doing is getting deep into the layers of meaning. So if you think about a costume designer, they really care about the weave. They really care about the weight of the fabric and how that fabric might change the performance of an actor. So we really need to think about how that technology that we're going to implement in the film is going to resonate with the actors, resonate with the performance. The way in which we do that is on something like The Martian, we go and talk to NASA. So we have NASA on a phone call every week, and we chat to them about what it actually means to be sending people into space. What do all those control systems do? What does that data mean? And as we really get deep into it, we start to allow the design to bleed through. It kind of informs the whole process. And that means we're building out visuals like this. And the important thing about visuals like this is they're not put in afterwards. We're actually going live on set. So it's not a green screen. It's all interactive elements on set in front of the actors. The director can walk around, understand the set. The director of photography, the person filming it, they can really have a sense of what's going on. They're not imagining what the green looks like. And, you know, everyone can truly engross themselves into that environment. Oh, I'm jumping very quickly. So we're going to talk about Blade Runner. Whee! If you haven't seen it, tough, because I'm going to talk about the story. So in terms of our clients, they were quite intimidating, I have to be honest. Denis Villeneuve, amazing director, worked on Arrival, and was just this driving force when it came to story. So all the meetings that we were having with Denis, they were all about story and how the technology we would use in the film would contribute to that narrative and would contribute to his point of the film. Roger Deakins, quite well known as well, won a couple of awards. We knew that if our work was seen in the film, it was because it was going to look beautiful. So there was this pressure for us to make the work look up to the standard that Roger Deakins would film. And lastly, Denis Gassner, a great production designer. He's really the architect of the film. He's setting the world. He's he's designing all these buildings, all the vehicles, and giving it an overall look. And we're really feeding into him and being a part of his team. So, the brief. One of the big words for us was brutality. Brutality of the environment, brutality of vehicles, brutality of the way society were treating one another, and you saw it everywhere. You saw it in the characters' faces. It was just brutal throughout. The sense of scale became really important. Everything needed to have this massive scale. The original film, we're trying to balance it off with this new film, jumping forward 50 years. It needed to feel true to that, but even more vast. And that could be interiors of buildings, exteriors, the projections, the great big holograms. It all had to have this huge sense of scale so that humanity felt quite small and lost in it all. And then finally, power. This power struggle was incredibly important. Be that between replicant and human, be that corporate power, and then obviously we've got power seeping through this character who's taking control of it all. So with those three ideas in mind, that was our brief for all the creative tech that we were going to end up designing throughout the movie. And it's brilliant. You get to work with costume department, you get to work with the art department, visual effects. We're crossing all of this, and we're really being collaborative in that creative process. And we get these little animations to give us a sense of the environment that they're designing. And then as we start to visually tune into them, we really start to understand the environment that we're building all this tech for. And we got it wrong. It went really wrong. The director really didn't respond to some of our early designs. They were a little bit too techy. They were, I guess, more attuned to what we would do for a Marvel film. And so we did make mistakes. And as the previous speaker was talking about failing fast, we had to go through that. It was important that we iterated quickly and found out where we were going wrong. And it was less about the final design, and it was more about our design process. What we realized was we were sat at computers designing, and that wasn't true to the nature of the film. The film was all about this notion of resetting technology. So between the original film that Ridley Scott directed and this film that Denis directed, there'd been a technology reset. And anyone that was in kind of the lower end of society, so most of us, were dealing with this kind of hybrid, optical, organic, almost mechanical technology. It wasn't electronic, really. So we knew that we needed to change our process and make it more organic and analog. And we ended up just doing things like cutting fruit through fruit, going to a butcher's and getting various different meat products. Our fridge looks a bit of a mess. And just photographing all of this stuff up really close so that we ended up with visuals and a process that was more like this. And then reprocessing the images, so photographing it, projecting it, maybe bringing it back into the computer, 3D modeling from there and projecting and photographing again. And it was that constant blend of analog and digital process that the director ultimately bought into and wasn't really too interested in the final result. Although it looked beautiful, it was organic, it was analog, and that's meant to be a brain scan, but it's actually a watermelon. It's interesting, it's fun. So we really threw ourselves into that. One of the next ones up was this idea of comparing DNA. There's that moment where they compare the DNA and it's actually the same. And we thought that the idea of a microfiche or an optical projection where things slide in would be really interesting. The director, again, really bought into that, and we ended up with this almost glass-like plate with graphics slotting into place, and it just felt authentic to the notion of the film. This scene was particularly key, and the reason for that is because, well, for me, I've got this kind of distinct memory of Blade Runner, that moment when Harrison Ford is zooming through the picture and finding that reflection in the mirror of the person. And that said something of his ability, and I think it said something of the replicant's ability in this film in that, there was true detective work going on, and only he knew where to look for that barcode in the pelvis bone. Oops. So, again, we went wrong. We went quite bright and saturated. One of the results was very CGI, and we had to really restrain ourselves and pull back. And we ended up getting a pelvis bone, 3D scanning it, rephotographing it, building in some real analog processes. And it was just about the beauty, being restrained with it, actually. Less is more always. and not too much in the way of graphic design, but just letting the work breathe and being true to the notion of the film. And we saw this the whole way through. When we were working with the concept designers, they were all using pen and pencil. And it would, the use of those materials would really change their creative process. It's a bit like now when we do photography. I remember when using 35mm, you knew that you only had 24 or 36 shots, and every shot needed to count. You couldn't edit it later. You couldn't find that shot again. Whereas now with digital, you edit, and you take hundreds of shots. But that pressure on the immediacy actually changes your creative output, which means you start designing things like this. So we were always very mindful of taking those designs of the environment and the vehicles and designing into them. So we knew that the spinner, this flying car, it mustn't feel like a car. It was sponsored by Peugeot, but it mustn't feel like a car. So it was more about making the tech true to a jet fighter. And that's where we went with this. We really pushed it into more of a aeronautical space in terms of technology. And it was really interesting, actually, that the director wanted the only warm tones within the graphics to be for our main character, who's a replicant, almost as though he's the most human of all of them. It felt like we'd all dehumanized ourselves. We'd become just more shrewd, more detached from reality, less warm in it all. And it was really, the replicant that was against that. And it was the technology was kind of giving this underlying sense of that. How am I doing? Oh, God, I need to add some slides back in. Okay, so this is the show reel of all the work.
I want to ask you some questions.
Checking in on an old serial number.
That's gonna be tough.
So, in an effort to win a bet and prove that I could do 60 slides in 20 minutes, I've done it in 15. What we need to remember is territory. We're all about STDs. It's all about story, design, and technology coming together, and that's what we believe in terms of world building. That process, that mixture of skills is really at the core of what we do. And I think we've got time for questions.